I like you see our unity wings up here? They are actually an ancient Egyptian symbol representing the relationship between spirit and soul and body. Now, of course, you know, through the years, different artists have done different renditions and such. You can find all kinds of pictures and all kinds of sculptures, but it really is that relationship between all parts of ourselves here now, and that soul gives wings to the body and the spirit. So we have this center place of our perspective now, and then the wings that spread out into the everything. And enveloping spirit is that enveloping principle and that consciousness and that awareness in which our body and our soul exist. So it like ties it all together. And it's also from where our inspiration is drawn, from within that spirit. So this winged globe is the earth and its soul, its consciousness, you know, recognizing that the earth itself and everything, absolutely everything, has a consciousness, because everything is part of spirit, and that it all exists together, one consciousness with individual perspectives, and those individual perspectives are you, right? And we move with that, and we fly with that. So as we grow in our spiritual nature, so does the earth and our physical wings. We fly above physical fears while embracing the unity of the spirit, the mind, and the soul, allowing physical matters to be influenced spiritually and honoring our tangible life as spiritual. So our actual life is spiritual. It doesn't have to, it's not an other. It's like our spiritual life isn't like out there and then our human life is here, that we have to somehow, you know, sometimes we try so hard to be in that spirit place, we forget that we're already there. I'm starting there because with all of that, our perspective gives us and the ability to choose, and we are blessed in that fashion to choose, because even though we know everything has consciousness, we are unique in that our consciousness gets to choose a whole bunch of things. We choose how we choose to experience this life, how we choose our understanding of a relationship with divine, both our internal relationship and our external relationships, which, remember, we're talking about everything is divine, all of it. We choose how to respond to our environment, what clothes to wear, what music to explore, what books to read. And we choose how we accept the reality of being the face, the hands, the ears, and the voice of the divine. You know, we are all of that. And how do we want to express that in the here and now? That is a large responsibility. And I think once we realize that we have that, it becomes a little bit more daunting in the choosing sometimes, because all of a sudden we're like, oh my goodness, we are the divine presence and we are the divine perspective. And how do we make choices based on that? You know, what is our relationship between our free will and our personal responsibility in that manner? Huge, huh? Huge concepts. And especially when we recognize that part of that responsibility, our divine responsibility, is to expand, to grow, to heal in our own unique perspective. It's like not to get stuck in one viewpoint, but to be willing to continually expand on that, to learn, to gather, to make a choice that might have been different from our choice even yesterday, and to be okay with that. So our own life's journey in relationship to others, to the earth, to all life in the universe. I mean, that's a lot. And it's not like we're going to be experts in everything, right? But the idea is that when things come up, that we recognize that viewpoints and perspectives both near us and those that then live in different cultures. You know, it's not all gonna be the same, but somewhere in there are real facts and real truth, right? That we can choose to grasp onto and work with. It doesn't mean it's easy at all. You know, the first song that we heard was healing takes a long time. You know, sometimes it does take a long time for us to get a grasp of new things and new ways and expanded points of view and where we can go on our next step. But in that realm, in that place of between free will and personal responsibility, we are tasked with making those choices that expand. You know, and you know, yes, in the free will, you can choose anything you want, and it's still life and it's still spiritual. But how much responsibility do you want to take for your growth? We understand that all matters of life are spiritual. Our thoughts, our souls, our emotions, our memory, the things around us, how we feel from day to day, whether we're ill or not, whether, I know Shelley said her car is not behaving, you know, all of that stuff, even though it's in our real time and all that, or shoveling because we're in a snowy season right now, or all of that, it's still spiritual. And again, we get to choose how we stand in the power of those choices. Are we using our personal responsibility not just to look in our own best interests, in our own perspective, but also in the wider perspective of knowing that everything, including the earth and everything on it, has a consciousness that we are involved with, and are part of that divine family. Now, unfortunately, so many things that involve that, for whatever reason, get put into this category called politics, and then we choose not to even go there and to even like learn more or make decisions, or we say, well, I just have to do this or that, because all of a sudden there's these external labels and lines in the sand and all of this stuff. And yet we are charged with talking and learning and going beyond that limited viewpoint of, oh my goodness, if I'm talking about recycling, that's politics, and we can't discuss that or learn more about that or express that or, you know, anything like our food choices now, because I know I made certain choices because of my realization, and again, it's up to everybody, but my choices have come down to, as much as possible, buying local foods because that cuts down on all kinds of things in terms of environment, and also, you know, being healthy in the body. You know, what things are we learning that we are willing to talk about, even if somebody else is putting that in the realm of politics and only, you know, it's my choice and my thing, and it has nothing to do with anybody else, when everything has everything to do with everybody else, no matter what we're doing. And that's, and it's huge. It is huge. We forget to look at the whole picture sometimes. You know, we sometimes I have this vision of, you ever see, you know, like cats in a box and they won't leave their box. So it's almost like, no, I'm not telling it, you guys are cats, use this as total metaphor, please. But, you know, you have a whole bunch of boxes everywhere, like the whole world is boxes and everybody's in their box, right? And kitty cats like their box and they stay in their box. And once in a while, if something really catches their attention, they'll wander out, but they usually go right back in their box and they stay there. And the boxes are like this, right? You don't get to see a big wide perspective. You got to get on top of the box, right? That's the first step, and see what everybody else is doing in their box. And then, oh my goodness, maybe you got to walk around to other boxes, or maybe you got to try to get to the border and get on a mountain and see what's happening all the way, you know, to really understand what the heck's going on? We forget that. We forget that, and we don't look outside our comfort zone boxes for information and recognition and to further our own growth perspective. It's the idea of advocating exploration and expansion. That's the healing. The healing is recognizing that our growth is healing, right? And that when we make better choices because of our growth, we heal a lot of things. Now, there is a New Yorker article from 2017. I want to point out the date because it's well before COVID, well before, and yet there's going to be some things in here that sound like I pulled it out of like today's paper or something, but but I find it fascinating that it was written well before, well before, 3 years before all of this craziness. And it's called Why Facts Don't Change in Our Minds. Why Facts Don't Change in Our Minds. New discoveries about human mind show the limitations of reason. It's by Elizabeth Colbert. And one of the quotes right out of the gate, it's a really long article, so I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, just a couple little excerpts. But the one quote that's right at the top is, the vaunted human capacity for reason may have more to do with winning arguments than thinking straight. There is something in us that wants our perspective to be right. And then once we've made this decision, even when we're shown other facts, other peer-reviewed articles, other experiences, all that, our heels kind of dig in, and there's a psychological thing for that. And I want to share with you one of the studies that was pointed out in the article. It was in Stanford in 1975. So this is like not super new science, right? They've been discovering this stuff for a while. So in 1975 at Stanford, they invited a group of undergraduates to take part in a study about suicide. They were presented with pairs of suicide notes, and in each pair, one note had been composed by a random individual and the other by a person who had completed suicide. The students were then asked to distinguish between the genuine notes, the ones that were actually written, and the fake ones, the ones that were made up by the scientist crew. Some students discovered they had a genius for the task. Out of 25 pairs of notes, they correctly identified the real one in 24 times. Others discovered that they were just hopeless at the task. They identified the real note in only 10 instances. As is often the case with psychological studies, this whole thing was a put on, right? So even though half the notes were indeed genuine, they were obtained from the Los Angeles coroner's office, the scores were fictitious. The students who'd been told they were almost always right were on average no more discerning than the ones that were told that they were mostly wrong. And in the second phase of the study, they told them about the deception. They said, this is what we did. We lied to you because we wanted to see how you would react. And the students were told that the real point of the experiment was to gauge their responses to thinking if they were right or wrong. This, it turned out, was also a deception because finally the students were asked to estimate how many suicide notes they had actually categorized correctly and how many they thought an average student would get right. And at this point, something very curious happened. The students in the high score group said that they thought they had in fact done quite well, significantly better than the average student, even though, as they'd just been told, they had zero grounds for believing this, zero. Conversely, those who'd been assigned to the low score group said they thought they had done significantly worse than the average student, a conclusion that was equally unfounded. Once formed, these researchers discovered, impressions are remarkably perseverant. A few years later, a new set of students were recruited, and they were handed packets of information about firefighters you know what, the same thing happened. The same thing. There are many, I said the article is a little bit long. I just wanted to give you an idea of what's going on here. It's, there's a book called The Enigma of Reason, where they talk about these, and they bring in all of these studies, and they talk about how hard it is for humans to change their mind, even when they have better information. There's a question here about sharing the article. I'll share the link when I post the video. I'll put the link right with it. As far as I know, it is free in the open right now, so you can read the whole thing. But think about that. I think once we learn about studies like this, it helps us stand on top of the box and then stand on the mountain and look at all the boxes. You know, once we realize that this is part of us to not change our mind, it doesn't mean that we're wrong all the time. That's not what it means. It means we can always learn more, right? And we can keep changing our minds. I think sometimes it is so hard for us to say, I totally misunderstood this. I totally got it wrong. I know now, based on this new information, that I was wrong, and I'm going to change my mind and keep going with it. It's almost like, and dare I say, there's been lots of information lately about people that get out of bad situations, whether they were in a abusive relationship, or whether they followed some kind of leaders that's similar to a cult or things like that, and how entrenched they get. And everyone's like, how can you do that? Well, the perspective isn't wide enough, right? And these people defy the odds, like it says in these studies, to break out of these situations. You know, do we have the courage to use our free will and personal responsibility in that manner, right? And to keep moving with that. You know, there's all kinds of things in our world, and there's, you know, clean water stuff and solar power, and, you know, and all these things get tied to, in fact, dare I say it, when I first started standing up here, I must have heard from 10 people for a year, we used to do it this way, right? It took us all a really long time to get used to each other, you know, to bring in what was best of the way we used to, and explore other ways, you know, in the process. There is a science fiction character named Jakar on a show called Babylon 5. And he, when the show first started, was an angry, nasty, single point of view, icky kind of personality, right? Nobody wanted to be around him. He was like, thought he was always right. There was things that happened in his past that he knew because of those things. This is the way the universe was. And he was stubborn. The more the show went, and the more he assimilated other things that were going on, he started writing a book that turned into the quote book of Jakar. His people found that he was writing this and started copying it kind of behind his back, right, and spreading it around, because it was an enlightened point of view. Only there was one episode where one of his fellow readers, you know, went up to him and said, well, in this part, you said this, and we need to be this way, and we need to go after them, and we need to do this. And he's like, did you realize that that was in chapter 2? Did you even read chapter 30, where I figured out that was a total wrong way to do it? And that we need to be nicer to each other, and that is, and banging on each other and yelling and stomping our feet is not the way anymore. I'm like, that, isn't that perfect? You know, isn't that perfect to realize that, you know, some of the things that we think we know happened in our lives in chapter 2, you know, and where are we at now? You know, we talk about honoring each other's positions and respecting them. I think that's good to a point. I think it's neat for us to push each other beyond willful ignorance. you know, because sometimes that's what it amounts to, is willful ignorance when we don't even want to try. And there's one more thing I want to share, is sometimes it's recognizing gratitude that we get to make certain choices to begin with. Because some people on this planet don't even have a chance to make that kind of decision, right? And there is an article in the New York Times by a Brazilian, I'm sorry, it wasn't New York Times, it's NPR, by a Brazilian photographer, RAPHAEL Alves, A-L-V-E-S. And since the beginning of all the worldwide pandemic, he's been taking pictures and writing about the experience of the Amazonian peoples. Now, the Amazonian peoples were kind of like segregated to begin with, right? We talk about, you know, how much do we interact with each other and all of this stuff. And yet these people didn't have much of a choice anyway, because the way their society is working is they were kind of already like other, right? Which means they don't have access to really good medical or sanitation or anything. So these people, and again, if you're interested, I will link the article there as well, because I don't want to read you the whole thing, but the idea is these people can't even make choices about whether to be around people and have a mask or not, or whether to get a vaccine or not. And because they can't even make those decisions, these photos are tragic in that they're dying, and what happens is it's almost like, dare I say, like, you know, the old Monty Python movie where they're yelling, "Bring out your dead," because that's what's literally happening in this area. And you know, how much are we even recognize that where we're at right now, because we're able to be in cleaner environments, we're able to be in areas that have better food, right? That we can actually make other choices, that some of these choices that these people were like, please give us these things so that we can live. They don't even get to say whether they want to or not, because it's just not available. And they are literally just in a really, really bad way because of politics, because of viewpoints on that their people in that society, and because of not having access. So do we recognize those things as well when we are deciding things for ourselves, maybe what other people have or don't have to make their decisions? And again, can we get on the mountain and look at more than just our own box and what's going on, and be willing to assimilate that extra information? And I'm just going to read the last paragraph of this article. It says the project, Alves' photography project, is called Insulae. It reflects on the idea that isolation is not just a consequence of pandemic. There is another isolation, different from what the World Health Organization recommends. It's ideological isolation, which goes far beyond the geographical, one that the peoples of the Amazon historically lived with. So what happens when this isolation goes beyond the pandemic or includes a pandemic? You know, I know we've all been through the ringer. I think in the wider perspective of making choices of consciousness for the whole world and recognizing that there is a consciousness everywhere, we may need to get out of our boxes just a little bit. Yeah. Thank you.